to see some serious shit.
Spider-Man キラリと光る光の目 Spider-Man 安らぎ捨ててすべてを捨てて悪を追って空かける Change the apart 君はなぜ君はなぜ戦い続けるのか命をかけて一筋に無敵の男スパイダーマン Spider-Man
So, I want to preface this review by making one thing clear as we go on tonight. There is no definitive correct opinion. I'm not right, and you're not wrong. I have rarely seen a film getting such divided reaction as this. Some people love it, some people think it's okay, some had problems with it, some detest it. And what mattered to me, and put everything into perspective as I left the theatre, was that the kids loved it. And I was wrong about that. If you're a long-time listener, you know I saw the trailers. I had images of kids being dragged out of the theatre by their parents because of the darkness and the what I thought to be disturbing tone that the trailers were selling. I thought, or should I say mis-selling. And actually, speaking of which, Kristina, why don't you tell us that little theatre-going anecdote that you told me by email?
Oh, Jesus, man. There's a bit near the end of this movie where, you know the bit where Gwen is hiding out in Oscorp and the lizard breaks in and there's that jump scare where the lizard pops up right in front of her and she's hiding or whatever. There was this little boy who was sitting a few rows down from me who just started to scream and cry, and he was begging, literally begging his father, please, Daddy, I don't want to be here. Please, please, please. And this man picked up his child and carried him out of there. And I was looking at this kid, and this kid did not look like he was throwing a temper tantrum at all. The kid looked and sounded absolutely petrified. And I felt terrible.
I don't see a problem with that. I mean, the kids I saw it with, they loved it, because when all is said and done, it was a Spider-Man movie. It had Spider-Man doing Spider-Man type things. It is what it was supposed to be, and that's all that matters. In fact, in the lobby after the film, I saw this little kid. He couldn't have been older than 3 or 4, and he was wearing the Spider-Man mask. Well, it was kind of the Mexican wrestler version of it, to be honest with you, but he was wearing a Spider-Man mask, and he raced out of that theatre, and he was doing the thwips with his hands, and he was trying to climb this pillar, Spider-Man style, and he kept falling off. It was very cute. Unsupervised, so it was a little disturbing, but I was keeping an eye on him just in case, and it was very cute. And that image for me was far more entertaining than the film I'd just seen. I enjoyed moments here and there very much. I loved the look of the film, as it turns out, the cinematography, the production design, the costumes. I loved the Spider-Man suit in this movie. The action was good, the way that Spider-Man moved and they got in those classic comic book poses was very cool. But it is like one of them comic book movies from the 90s where I find myself defending the look of the film despite everything else pretty much falling flat on its face. For the most part, I think it does. I found Amazing Spider-Man to be a very mechanical, soulless, uninvolving, emotionless piece of work. I didn't care about anyone in it. And add to that the utterly disjointed story, the way that plot threads are set up and then completely abandoned, the way that key sequences in the film have either no setup or have such gaping plot holes that even an idiot like me spotted them. And you have a frustratingly flawed film. But I think our special guest is going to disagree with me. So, Pietro, in a nutshell, what was the movie like for you?
I thought it was fantastic. Out of the 4 Spider-Man movies we've gotten, I think this one is as close to a comic book adaptation of the decade-long source material as I've seen. It was heartfelt and beautiful to watch. I couldn't have asked for something better. For what we could have gotten at this point, I think this is the best thing that we could have gotten. So I was very, very pleased.
And Shawn, what did you think?
Pretty much in that same camp as I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I saw a very different movie in the marketing. So about 30 minutes into the movie, I had to kind of do this reality check on myself and get past a few preconceptions. I still had some problems with the movie, but pleasantly surprised. That's the best way I could put it.
And now the scale starts turning very much the other way, I think, as I go into Kristina.
I was pretty meh to this movie, honestly. I didn't hate it. This isn't like a Green Lantern situation where I walked out of it like in a daze, like what the fuck did I just watch? But I didn't love it either. I just found it to be just sort of there. And I didn't think that it had much heart or much emotion. Like you were saying, Phil, I didn't really care about these characters. And then it came to the ending, and oh my god, we're gonna get into this later on, but that scene at the end with Peter and Gwen really, really turned me off. I was just in shock at what I was seeing. But overall, this movie's a meh to me.
Jamie?
Everyone's thinking I'm going to say the worst thing about it. That's why I got to say it for last, apparently. To me, it's the definition of mediocre. It's at times beat for beat the Raimi film, and, some would argue it's unfair to compare it to that, but I would counter with Chris's argument a couple of weeks ago about comparing Brave to the other Pixar films. When Brave came out, Pixar made it very clear that we're Pixar, we made the following movies, and they listed them all out there in pecking order of greatness, arguably. And by saying it's the untold story, I think they pretty much open themselves up to a lot of this criticism. But it's blah. I didn't really what I thought really made up for it was the performances. They were all really fucking good. I'm not going to go around saying I thought Garfield was better than Maguire. I think that's nonsense. However, he was great, and what he made it work. How should I put this? He made what they gave him worked, because what he was playing was not Peter Parker that we know as Peter Parker. Peter's supposed to be this social outcast, this loser, this dork, this guy who the whole weight of the world is always on this poor guy's shoulders, and that's not Garfield. That's not what he was playing at all. You didn't really empathize with Garfield as much. But they basically made him you know what it was? It was the Smallville version of Spider-Man. He's Spider-Man in all but the suit. Because there's no character growth, there's no change. You don't see him really mature over the course of 2 hours like you see Tobey mature. And I guess the best comparison in that regard would be you look at Superman the movie, and you look at Batman Begins, and yeah, you'd say Spider-Man, and those are superhero epics and whatnot, and those follow a certain formula. Really, at their core, is they're coming of age stories. They're about, and you guys are about to laugh, but it's true. They're about boys growing up to becoming men, or a kid to an adult. There's a less silly way of saying it. And I didn't feel that Garfield's Peter Parker, although he was great, I didn't feel that this guy went through any kind of emotional journey. There was no growth on this guy's part over 2 hours. He was the same selfish asshole that he was at the beginning that he was at the end.
I've read some reviews, and I have to say, surprisingly, I do disagree. I think I've heard some people saying that they feel that this is not Peter Parker, that they've got it completely wrong. I have a perspective on it much differently. I personally feel that the character of Spider-Man is simply an archetype, much like a Batman or a James Bond. You will have a different actor, you'll have a different interpretation. That's exactly what's going on here. You have people trying as hard as they can to make it fresh and different. That doesn't mean you have to like it, but I certainly admire that the approach was taken. And I remember the Peter Parker that John Romita Sr. drew, being a heartthrob. I didn't think he was a geek at all. He was a handsome man, and he got tons of women. It always turned out badly, but I understand completely why that kind of approach was taken here, why it was so easy for him and Gwen to hook up. Pietro?
I don't understand where this this mentality where Peter Parker has to be the geek of all geeks that everybody dislikes, and he's the most inept social outcast ever. That's a caricature, and that may be what Raimi put in his movies. But we're talking about that's a character that worked in the comics in the '60s. The bow tie wearing geek with the horn rimmed glasses. That doesn't work nowadays. That's not relatable for the modern day social outcast. So updating a character so that it fits into a new movie where, kids of, this generation can look at it and say, okay, well, that's relatable. I understand. What's wrong with me? I'm good looking, I'm talented, I'm intelligent, but I'm just not popular. That happens all the time. And that's what was presented in this movie. The same thing can be said about Clark Kent from the Donner films. Zack Snyder tried to do the exact same Clark Kent that Donner did, but it doesn't work 30 years later. Having this very mild-mannered, geeky reporter, he would stand out more than anything else. He wouldn't be in the shadows and somebody that people forget. They have to modify these as the times change so that the character is still relatable for that niche audience that you're supposed to connect with. That's what I think Garfield did very well. He wasn't a character. He wasn't a campy version of Peter Parker. He's what Peter Parker would be like nowadays, wearing contact lenses, being intelligent, but still having that sort of little hipster vibe. Somebody that people forget.
Shawn?
You've kind of touched on a few of the points I was going to as well. I think I just kind of want to expand on, you mentioned the adaptation of what it's like to be a geek today compared to what it was in the 60s or even 10 years ago. For me, and I kind of mentioned this earlier about having preconceptions with the movie, on a personal level, I always enjoyed Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. For me, that was how I grew up envisioning the character. So I'm a little more biased in that sense, and as much as I like Andrew Garfield, and as much as he convinced me that in some ways he was Peter Parker, I don't think it can quite live up to that preconception for me. And that's probably just a fault of my own, but I think there's a lot of other people out there that feel that way. And a big byproduct of that is, this is probably just a point we're all going to hammer on quite a few times today, but it's a comparison to a movie and an interpretation of a character that is only 10 years old. If we were having this discussion 10 years from now, after Maguire and Raimi's version had, another decade to marinate a little bit, I think it would be easier to accept a different version of that character on screen. Whereas now it's just, there's conflicting emotions for fans. I've never considered myself a diehard fan of Spider-Man to the point where I didn't read the comics on a consistent basis, but I read them enough to be a casual fan as a kid growing up. It was Sam Raimi's movie and Tobey Maguire's version of Peter Parker that kind of pushed me over the edge. And I think there's just a lot of people that feel that way, but at the same time, that's not a knock on Garfield. And that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a different interpretation. But I think that gap, that small gap in time, is still by far the biggest mistake that the series could have made. But Sony just didn't really have any choice at the same time either. And I guess you have to adapt to a certain level. Bringing in the hipster part of it, I do take a little issue with that because I thought that in some ways that's the same mistake Spider-Man 3 made. There was no need to make Peter Parker give him that 20-minute emo mood. And it's not as bad in Amazing Spider-Man, but I feel like the hipster thing is just a little too forced. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
No, Shawn, you've summed it up so brilliantly. I think we'll end the show right there. So thanks for joining us, everybody. No, Jamie, go ahead.
Well, no, what I mean, let me give an example though. Is like there are excellent points you guys just brought up. Absolutely. But my feeling is like, as I harped on earlier, is like, where's the growth? At the beginning of the movie, Peter Parker. At the beginning of the Sam Raimi movie, Peter Parker he's like, what's the first thing we see him? He's trying to catch up to a bus and everyone is against this poor guy for no reason. We see we see a growth in front of us. Like we see Flash Thompson, everybody pick on him. And then later on, when he gets his powers, he stands up to Flash. And we see him mature. And he has to make some really hard choices. And like, a simple example is like, Peter in Amazing Spider-Man is what's the first thing he does in this movie as a teenager is he's standing up to Flash Thompson. Well, the problem with that decision is that there then is no meaning to the scene later on where he also reiterating a scene from Spider-Man where he basically gives Flash his comeuppance. There's no meaning to that scene because it doesn't have the same meaning anymore. Because we saw he already stood up to him. So the difference is now he has the upper hand, as opposed to in the Raimi film where Peter now is standing up to Flash and he got his ass kicked the first time. He wouldn't even go near Flash. He would never fight him, challenge him. It actually means something when he does that. And I get it's shit like that. Also, I don't know. I mean, I didn't get the impression that this Peter was as much of an outcast socially. This guy could have easily, I don't know. I mean, did anybody get, I didn't get that vibe. What did you, I mean, Chris, well, no, Pietro's next. Go ahead, dude.
Raimi's movies are very much, they're parodies almost. They're caricatures of certain archetypes. I mean, you talk about, I personally cannot relate to any of the characters in Raimi's movies. They're these, bizarro versions of real people that I may know. I don't know anybody who is that much of a dork. People don't pay attention to the outcasts in high school. It's not like everybody knows who Peter Parker is because he's the dorky guy. They're in the shadows. Nobody knows who they are. Kind of like how Andrew Garfield was. And the way that he related, or the way he spoke with Flash Thompson in Amazing Spider-Man, it looks like two kids grew up together. One of them ended up becoming the popular jock, and one of them just ended up being a nobody. But he spoke with him the way that you would with somebody that you've known for years. That's why he stood up to him. He didn't stand up to him because, well, this is right and I have to do what's right. Like, come on, man, stop being an ass. You know, I know you really are. Cut that out. And if you look at Raimi's movies, Joe Manganiello, who played Flash Thompson, when was Flash Thompson this, like, freaking uber-Italian kid from Queens? That was such a caricature. It was so ridiculous, you know? I didn't get that. I didn't get that at all. There was no purpose to it. And anybody who has read comics know that Flash Thompson, he wasn't a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. He was a kid from, kind of a broken home, and he was just popular because he was an athlete, and he acted out because that's what popular kids do in high school. And his character growth later on shows that he and Peter become very close friends because he does empathize with Peter, and they do show that in this movie. As far as character growth, Raimi's first Spider-Man movie, it seems to span almost 2 years.
Yeah.
He's in high school, and then after, and then he's got this job. In this one, we're looking at something that I would guess is about 5 to 6 months of Peter Parker's life. How much growth is there? There might be realizations. There might be moments where he's like, okay, crap, I got to change. But how much growth can you really, really put? It's not a story of a boy becoming a man. It's a story of Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man.
I am really in line with Shawn here in terms of Andrew Garfield versus Tobey Maguire. The reason why Tobey works so well for me in that Spider-Man movie is because I can 100% buy him as a social outsider and as a total dweeb. Because I look at him and I think, yeah, he's not going to have any friends and no girl on the planet's going to want to bang him. Of course he's going to be alone. I look at Andrew Garfield and I cannot for 1 second buy that this guy is a social outcast. Because if that guy went to high school with me, he would have to duck every time he walked down the hallway because girls would be throwing their panties at his head left and right. I just couldn't buy it. And I get what Pietro was saying about, well, just because he's good looking or whatever, that doesn't mean much. Maybe he's still unpopular, but for me, I just couldn't get past that at all. It seems like such a vain and silly and trite thing to say, but to me, he's just too good looking for me to buy him as being unpopular, and that no girl except Gwen would check for him. I just couldn't buy that at all.
Obviously, as we go on here, we keep making the comparisons to the Raimi movies, and I wanted to do something over the weekend, and I'm sure a lot of people actually did the same. I bought the Blu-ray for the first movie, and I wanted to watch it just to make sure that I wasn't remembering that film as better than it actually is. And, the film hasn't aged well for some people. I watched it, I still love it, and there's a specific reason why I love it. You have to have a powerful emotional hook driving the film. If certain other elements don't work, which is the case in Spider-Man 1, The film as a whole will still connect to an audience as long as you have that hook. Spider-Man 1 is about a guy trying to win the heart of the girl next door. Simple as that. It might be corny, but it works. I buy into it. I want those kids to get together at the end. You know why? Because it's a struggle for them to get together. So the film works for me. Amazing Spider-Man doesn't have that. But the frustrating thing is that it almost did. The film begins with what looks like it's going to be a really powerful, dramatic hook. Who are Peter's parents, really? What do they do? Why did they leave? What happened to them? I like that premise. I've always wanted to know since I read the comics as a kid what happened to his parents. We don't get to find out because the film dumps the concept, sacrificing it for a sequel, and even that is an assumption at this point that they're either going to pick up that thread. I think that's a terrible mistake.
Their character arc, Peter and MJ, I just don't get it. She seemed to only like Peter because he accepted her if she didn't become popular. If she didn't become famous and she was just the girl next door, then okay, this guy will still love me. I didn't like that at all. It was almost like she was using him to validate her normalcy. I don't understand how that was a relationship that you want to aspire to. It very much seemed like, okay, well, she'll settle because Peter will always be there. So I don't, that relationship didn't touch me compared to his relationship with Gwen in this movie. They were so great together on screen. For me, it was so natural. I mean, maybe it has to do with the fact that they're dating in real life, but their chemistry was phenomenal, and I didn't expect these two characters to connect the way they did in this movie.
I'm genuinely shocked at what you just said about that Peter-MJ relationship. That's the whole point of that relationship, is that everyone else only likes her because she's pretty. They only like her because she's popular. And this guy loves her for who she is, and that's why she loves him so much. I thought that was a great relationship. I don't understand why you hated it so much. I feel sad.
Probably because she's not a bombshell. I mean, she looked like as plain a girl as possible. So to say all these people were after her only because she's good looking, that makes absolutely no sense to me. If you would have had somebody in there who actually was the redheaded bombshell MJ from the comics, then it makes sense. But she looks as much of a plain Jane girl next door as you could get.
I feel like they made that decision to make her look more like the girl next door, though, and I had no problem. I actually thought Dunst was great in the first two movies. I feel like this thing against Dunst, mostly, I'm not saying you're one of them, because we've talked about this before. I mean, you are a fan of the Raimi movies for the most part. Yeah. But before the new movie came out, we were talking about it privately. But I feel like in fact, I know most of the hatred against Dunst is because of the third movie, because they decided to retcon her character arc and make her a selfish bitch in Spider-Man 3, because they did. First two movies, you're kind of behind her. You see why she's like, seeing it from her point of view, she's like, well, here's this guy I'm really into, but he's always fucking disappearing, and then he's got these weird excuses, or he just wants me to forget the fact that he just blew me off. And then it all makes sense at the end of the second one, and she makes a decision, I'm going to stick with him no matter what, which was beautiful in the end of the second movie. However, how many, 40 minutes into the third movie, she just suddenly becomes a selfish bitch because you missed my play. Well, he was saving the world, you dumb bitch! What are you getting off on him for? It's like, that makes no sense! I don't know. I feel like that's where a lot of the frustration of that character is coming from. Because they did just, I don't know what the hell, why they, I feel like they added conflict for the sake of conflict in the third movie.
This isn't about you. It's about me. It's about my career. That's an actual line.
Oh, I thought it was about me and Phil. I'm sorry.
That's true too. That is true. I mean, well, but that is the question to ask, Pietro, and I was going to ask it myself. Is it possible, and I'm just asking because I've not discussed it with you, but you're lumping all the movies in together. I'm specifically talking about the first film. That relationship works.
Yeah. No, I'm not. In discussing this film, I try and look at it as a standalone piece. At the same time, when I compare it to Spider-Man, to the Raimi trilogy, I'm only comparing it to the first film because it's not fair. This isn't a sequel. This isn't a threequel. If you're going to compare it, you got to compare it to the first film. And in the first film, I just did not. The only character that I truly felt a connection with was Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn. Not Willem Dafoe as a Green Goblin Power Ranger hybrid, but as Norman Osborn. And of all the characters, let me tell you, this was the first Spider-Man movie, I mean, I was still young, but that's when I first started really getting into movies and, reading reviews and things. And when I saw that casting, I was so happy because he is such a character actor. And his facial expressions, everything, just scream Green Goblin. Yes, he can play this role. Then they cover up his face with a big metal mask, and you can't even see him play the character. It could have just been anybody in the suit. It was such a disappointment. And comparing that to Kurt Connors as the Lizard in this one, sure, it was a CGI creation, but you still could connect with the facial expressions, and you could still see when he became this, megalomaniac scientist who just cared about his single serving purpose of changing the world. At least I connected with him. At least I connected with the character, whereas I couldn't connect with, the green in the Power Ranger suit.
Well, maybe that's a good segue, actually. So let's talk about the Lizard. This might shock everybody here, but I was actually fine with the look of the Lizard in the movie. Part of the reason for that is that I actually find his look in the comics extremely boring. The alligator look, the snout look, just didn't do anything for me, and that's part of the reason why I was like, when I heard he was going to be in the movie finally, I was like, oh, whoop-de-doo. So, for them to have a more mutated man in this movie, it worked. Yes, he does look like a Goomba from the Super Mario Brothers movie. He does, totally, but I'll live with it. What I did find to be a mistake was the fact that they made him talk. For two reasons.
Oh, God, yes. That was the...
For two reasons. Number one, I don't think it adds a single thing to the movie. And secondly, any fan of classic monster movies will tell you it's far better in a movie where you have a monster that was once a man to have something that is now completely unrecognizable, that cannot communicate verbally, that can only communicate through the eyes, through the facial expressions, so you can only, glimpse at the man that once was. I just thought, look, it's not like he has many monologuing speeches or anything in this movie. He only has a few lines, but still, I thought that was a mistake.
I didn't have a problem. I mean, the Lizard's kind of, my issues with the movie kind of don't even, the Lizard looks stupid. I think I agree him talking was a huge mistake, but, and his plan was stupid, but let's be honest here, you cannot hold that against this. You know why? It's a comic book movie. You know what else? All villains' plans are stupid. You name me one superhero movie where the villain's plan doesn't make you go, huh? That's why I'm like, okay, he wants to turn people into lizards, fine. I don't have an issue with that. Whatever. Yeah, I thought he was fine, actually. I feel like I kind of feel bad for him. I feel like we missed a lot of performance that got cut out. Him, Sally Field, more than anyone else. I feel like they had the brunt of the cutting room floor. The one bit I really liked of hers, because it's the one bit that stands out, is when he gets home and he goes, oh, don't worry about it, go to bed, and she yells at him, I can't go to sleep. And it's like, I thought, alright, that makes sense, that's fine. But, changing the look, Aunt May is typically a decrepit old woman. I don't say that to sound silly, but, that's the way she's always been designed from the beginning to the middle to the end of the comic run at where we are. She always looks like she looks like the Crypt Keeper. I'm just going to be...
Except in the Ultimate Comics line, which is where they drew the Uncle Ben and Aunt May, dynamic from. They drew that from the Ultimate Comics, where they are a bit younger, and they would be Peter's parents' age. They wouldn't be like grandparents.
Yeah, which I didn't have an issue with Field. It was different. Kind of because it does go against the conception of what you think of Aunt May, but that's fine.
Well, of course, the bigger issue then is Uncle Ben. Now, Jamie has only hinted at this in emails to me, but the handling of the Uncle Ben situation...
It's unforgivable.
You feel that way. I honestly, this will shock you again, Jamie. I actually didn't mind it, because I had again, it's expectations. I had a completely different botched version of it in my head, that, he was just going to die of a heart attack or something. I thought it was going to be terrible. As it is literally... the whole, it's the original origin, it's just reworked, and it's not done as well because, for my money, the way it's handled in Raimi's movie is perfect. You can't improve upon perfection. That's all subjective, but that's how I feel. I
like that they changed it. I like the dynamics of how they changed it up leading up to that point. Like, they yell about his dad. They have a real fucking fight. They're yelling at each other. I actually like that. That's being different. Fine. It's just that, it's simple. you could, they clearly changed like the origin of like the whole DNA fucking with Peter's origin stuff. Fine. I never cared about that because it's like, well, it's still a spider bite. It's just you change up the circumstance of it. Fine, whatever. But you can't take the blood out of Peter's hands with Uncle Ben's death because that's the most important part of the character. It's not the one-liners. It's not all that stuff. It's the fact that, if he fucked up and let this guy go when he had every right to stop him, and the blood's always going to be in his hands, and no matter, like, that's the thing about the character that I think Raimi got perfectly was, no matter how many times he saves the world, he always thinks to himself, yeah, but I didn't save Uncle Ben, I really should have, and that's always going to haunt him for the rest of his life. And
you saying that they didn't do that in this film?
I totally don't think I don't think they completely disregarded the Ben stuff after 20 minutes. I don't feel that is on his conscience whatsoever, because, frankly, he's not as responsible here. Ben is more responsible for his own death, for like the gun going on, like the gun jumping on the sidewalk, and he jumps at the gun. If that was me or you, we'd be like, yeah, dude, later, bye. And it's like, what?
That's not true. I mean, you're
talking. Run at it? Ooh, bye, your own funeral, sir. But it's like that. But it was so dumb, though. He gets involved with it. You take away Peter's responsibility. It's so petty, though. It's about a take a penny, leave the penny. Shit, we're trying to be jokey. It's just, it's.
I could not be on the opposite side even more. It felt like that was something that could have happened exactly in a neighborhood of Queens, and it would have played out just like that. Him, as much as I did love the dynamic between Peter and Uncle Ben in Raimi's first Spider-Man movie. Again, it was a very cartoonish version of that relationship. This movie brought it grounded. Everything from, even Uncle Ben saying, okay, you're going to have to fix the boiler because it's broken, to them, reassuring each other, and him being afraid to talk about Peter's parents because he doesn't want to bring that up, to their fight that led to Ben's death. It absolutely worked for me. Especially for a scene that you knew it was coming. You knew this was coming. You knew Uncle Ben was going to die. They could have screwed it up so bad and made it a non-emotional moment. And it just worked so well for me. You're talking about you can't improve upon perfection. You can't, but you can parallel it. You can take it from a different angle and make it just as meaningful. And I think that's what they did here. I don't see a problem with it. And you're talking about nobody would jump at a gun. We're talking about a man in his 50s or 60s from a different generation. My father, my older brother, my uncles, and the way I was raised was you do the right thing. Even if that means putting yourself in harm's way. Maybe this new generation of kids, they don't believe in that, but this is what Uncle Ben stood for. Yeah, you got to do the right thing, and even if it means you're going to put yourself in harm's way. It's an instinctual decision, and I think it worked. It worked very well. Would Peter have done that? Hell no. But Uncle Ben doing it, it makes absolute sense.
And now a special episode of Law & Order Criminal Intent.
Well, it's not even the mugger killed him. The gun goes off accidentally. It's like, I mean, again, you take away all the...
How does the gun go off accidentally?
They're in the struggle and the gun goes off. Like, it's not like he clearly, like, points the trigger and, like, puts it to his gut and, like, that's it, you're dead. It went off.
I don't see how the problem with that is. It's not like he pointed the gun to his face and shot him, but they were struggling for the gun and he shot him in the chest.
The gun went off. That's the only reason he quote
There's only one way a gun goes off, and it's when you pull the trigger, so...
Oh, the gun goes off in the movie. Like, if I'm on Law & Order, if I'm Ben Stone, I'd prosecute that guy on manslaughter, or murder 2, not murder 1. I don't know, I had a problem with...
Well, we want to get into that. Any homicide committed in the omission of a crime is murder 1, so... But then again, I've been a cop for 10 years, so let's not get into that.
Play the Law & Order thing.
These are their stories. No, see, here's the thing. Well, if that, I'll accept that, Pietro. I disagree, but I'll accept it. But what I can't get behind is the idea that they just dump that story. And it is dumped. You can't look. I can understand if we're going to say, okay, he doesn't catch the killer, if there's some kind of meaning behind it, but there's no even scene to suggest that that's the case. It's simply a thread, 20 minutes worth of deleted scenes perhaps, that they've cut from the movie. Tell me I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong, because I don't see it that way. It's the what's important. It's the lesser of two evils mentality. If you have a small fire burning in the bathroom and a big fire burning on your bed, which would you try to put out first? He was chasing after Ben's killer, and then all of a sudden, Connors turns into the lizard and starts destroying New York. Something more important happened, and because of his conversation with Captain Stacy, he realized that, okay, well, something more important happened. I have to do this. It's my obligation to do this. It was a small turn. It wasn't something that was poignant and, okay, I need a monologue to go into why I'm doing this. He just realized, I have to do this because I'm capable of doing it. Did he ever get a chance to go back to look for Uncle Ben's killer? No, that was never addressed. But did it need to be addressed? Something more important happened. And the story went forward because something more important happened.
I think that's just excusing the movie's laziness about just getting rid of that plot element, though. It's just they just dumped it. They completely got rid of it. Like, I agree. Like, that is the greater evil. Is that I agree on that part. But I mean, they could have easily had it go concurrently or side by side, or have some way of having it flow at the same time as the lizard predicament in the last hour, 40 minutes ish, I'll say. But they got rid of it. It was gone. It felt like it was something that got completely cut out. And they just said, like, fuck it, we're not going to deal with it. Now, the stuff with the parents, I felt like they cut stuff out of there too, but they're like, yeah, we'll save it for another one. I don't know if we're ever going to go back to the mugger in this. There's no closure. You set up some plot element like that, you have to give closure in some degree. And that's where you go back to the Raimi movie. Yeah, 3 retconned it, but, just talking about the first movie, there's closure with the mugger. Like, the mugger gets killed. Like, there is that story, that part of the story comes to a close. There's none of that here. They just left it wide open out of laziness, I felt.
But in the first movie, they also disregarded Ben after that happened. Mugger's dead? Okay.
Nonsense! Okay, for one thing, we have the scene after graduation. He's graduated, he's proved everybody right, his aunt's proud of him, he's all set up for moving into the city, and MJ's moving to the city, whole life seems worked out. It doesn't matter. He goes back to his room and he's sobbing incontrollably because he cannot forget. It's not the fact that he let Uncle Ben die because of his negligence, it's the fact that the last words that they spoke to each other were spoken in anger, which is something that a hell of a lot of people can relate to. It's the whole crux of the movie at the end, and the fact that his replacement father figure, Norman Osborn, has turned out to be a lunatic, and his real father was Ben Parker. It reverberates throughout the whole film. It's vitally important. Honestly, dude. And
I don't see that. I honestly don't see that. If anything, you would see, is Aunt May still upset throughout the movie? Does Peter reference it? I mean, one line, oh yeah, Ben Parker. Oh, so an hour later, now you remember that Ben Parker existed? I didn't see that weight on his shoulders. He became Spider-Man, and then that's it. He's developed, he's grown, and he's good now.
I don't want this to get sidetracked because he's very easily will. But
that's true. Actually,
but let's get back to Peter and Gwen, because the whole crux of my argument and me talking about the film being mechanical is simply because Peter and Gwen, for my money, get together for no reason that's really been established. They may be good actors doing a good job with good chemistry, but I can't get invested in their relationship because it hasn't been earned. And people are going to tell me, well, that's what it's like in the comics, Peter and Gwen just to get together. You're absolutely right. This isn't a comic. It's a film. And in a film, relationships are earned. Love is earned. Trust is earned. So when these things are put to the test, they mean something. You're invested, and I'm not saying that in the sequels they won't improve upon that so that when, spoiler, Gwen dies, it will actually mean something. I really, really hope it does. But I'm so glad Gwen didn't die at the end of this movie, because if she had, I wouldn't have given a shit. I'm sorry.
Wow, really? I
don't understand what needs to be earned. You're saying that, you're making it sound like every time you date somebody or you feel affection towards somebody, it has to be earned.
Well, no, but I think it's more like you didn't feel like there was a real struggle between them as a couple. It's like from the very beginning, from the beginning they like each other. They start dating. She finds out he's Spider-Man. There doesn't seem to be any kind of conflict. The only real conflict that comes about with their relationship is at the very end, with Captain Stacy basically having to tell Peter, oh, by the way, stop dating my daughter. And even then, Peter decides to cop block her.
Why does there have to be a conflict?
Well, it's kind of a boring story if there's no conflict with a couple, though. You have to admit that. I get what you're saying though. That's true. Why does there have to be a conflict? You're right. Why should there have to be? Because the movie gets less interesting. There's less of a dynamic, less of a story to go on. That's why.
I don't see that at all. The conflict was Gwen didn't want to date him because of the situation with her father. When she found out he was she loved him as Peter Parker. she at the least liked him as Peter Parker. When she found out he was Spider-Man, that's where the conflict was. Did she really want to get involved with this guy?
And she does.
Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
She questions it in that scene when he tries to kiss her again, and she's saying, I've been here before. Since I was a little girl, my father's been a cop, and I didn't know if he was going to be safe. But the affection overcame that worry. How much more conflict does there need to be in a real-world relationship?
Shawn.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. Now, I kind of see both sides of the point here, but I'm more with Pietro because I don't feel like there really needed to be this major conflict between Gwen and Peter for two reasons. One, I don't want to judge the film continuously based on comparisons to Raimi's first film, but it's just the perspective I'm taking on it. The first Raimi film was centered so much around the conflict between Peter and Mary Jane. If they had done something similar with Gwen and Peter in this one, it would have just been one more thing for us to be critiquing against it right now and saying how similar it was. So personally, that's one reason I liked that they pretty much just got together. And then they do have that one little bit of conflict where she's reluctant to be with him because of her experience with her dad being a police officer. And for me, that was enough. It was kind of fresh to see the relationship between Peter and ex-girl not take front and center and become the cornerstone of the story. That's just my point of view, though.
It's almost like it's true to form for every comic book film to feature the hero pining over the girl. He pines over the girl. It happened in Nolan's Batman movies. Happens in the Superman movies. Happened in Daredevil. Happens in Hulk. Happens in X-Men. It's always the hero pining over the girl. Why can't the two people just like each other? And that's what happened here. Because that makes a whole lot more sense.
I agree. I'm behind you on your on that ideology, but then the movie decides at the very last second to give some kind of conflict that Captain Stacy tells Peter, "Stop dating my daughter," when he's dying. Oh, spoiler alert. That's not a spoiler, shit. But no, but it's just that then they renege on it. I mean, that kind of goes back to my thing about how Peter's portrayed here. He doesn't really do any growing up because he has to have Captain Stacy tell him to lay off his daughter because he has more important things on his shoulders now, as opposed to the first movie where, Peter makes an adult decision and has to lie to Mary Jane to her face that, no, I don't love you, and then he has to walk off and leave her crying, which was a more powerful, it left you with something. And that's the last scene of the movie, if you don't count the swinging through Manhattan obligatory Spider-Man scene that they all must have now. I guess that's their Superman over the earth shot, I guess, which is okay, it's fine. But, here it's like you think he's going to honor Stacy, and then he decides to be a dick and says, "Yeah, I'm not gonna."
And I don't think it's so much as being a dick. The reason that worked in the first Spider-Man movie is because Peter is an adult now, and he made that adult decision on his own. He's still a high school kid in Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, but the thing about the character has always been that he's had to make adult decisions even being a kid. That's why the character was first popular, was, the fact that all these problems kept coming to this guy and he had to make the adult decision how old is he in the comics? Like 17? He's a kid.
Yeah.
As you said, like the first one's about 2 years. I'm sorry, go ahead, Phil.
It depends which comics you're reading, because as I say, as John Romita Sr. drew him, he looked 30 when he was in school, and he never changed age.
And some people would argue that was Tobey in
Probably.
the first one.
Here's the thing, Pietro. I agree with you on the choice that he makes. He's a teenager. He makes the human, interesting, selfish choice. I like that. My problem is it's happening in this film. I understand that the reason why Gwen is going to be doomed is because of the selfish choices that these human beings make. That's great. That's drama. It shouldn't be happening at the end of this movie. It shouldn't be butt-fucking the choice that's just been made at the end of this movie and reneging it. I think that's a bad move, and I think it's entirely... I actually don't blame the filmmakers here. I think it's an ending that's been produced as a response to the ending of Spider-Man 1. The way that some people, not everybody, but some people reacted to that movie where they felt, oh, why didn't you get together? You love each other. People who didn't understand the whole fucking point. The fact that this guy has spent 2 hours struggling to win the affections of this girl, and when he's finally got it, he actually has to give it up because he's a goddamn hero. That's why it works. And in this movie, I'll say, I don't blame him, but it's a mistake to be happening now.
And this is where it comes into play, his dynamic with his family. because if he had stuck to the guidance that Uncle Ben and Captain Stacy had given him, two men that he respected that died in the course of the film, then he would have stayed away from Gwen. But it's Aunt May who had that little speech at the end and said, nobody can tell you, what you need to do with your life. You need to be happy. So he based his going against what Stacy had guided him on Aunt May's guidance, which makes her more important to the story. She's not just a conscience that's telling him to do the right thing over time. She's somebody who's actively involved in his life and his happiness.
I think Aunt May is the shadowy figure in that Easter egg scene. I think she's the one pulling the strings. I think she's behind everything. Another thing I did want to bring up was that I wrote an article. Oh God, it must have been years now. Jamie will tell you, but
marveling at the best.
That's right. And I talked about the first movie, and I talked about the weaknesses, and I felt that it should have had Gwen from the start, and you should have had Captain Stacy in there representing the police, and Spider-Man chased properly by the cops as an outlaw. Because, in the first movie, they say Spidey's an outlaw, but it's totally rushed and thrown away. It's a big weakness of that film. And you can't say the filmmakers didn't feel the same way, because they did try and correct it by putting the Stacys in film 3. This film puts those elements in right from the start. But it's just an element that isn't really used very well. I mean, it's part of the reason that I think is that, it's fine that Stacy thinks he's an outlaw, but we never find out what the rest of New York thinks about Spider-Man. Really, we find out one guy, the father of this child that gets saved on the bridge. We find out what he thinks about Spider-Man. That's it. What does the rest of New York think about Spider-Man? Raimi's movies made that a vital ingredient. Spider-Man was the heart of the city eventually, but he had to earn that love, and fell out of favour and all that kind of thing. And in this movie, they don't do anything with that. And I think,
they do. They just do it on a more subtle level.
Yeah, the logo, the spray paint.
Exactly, the logo and the the people coming to help him at the end with the crane scene. That should give you plenty notice of what they think.
So that's going back to comparing it to the first movie, and you feel like that just kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, we had to do that again. The New Yorkers behind him, like that was just kind of like, like as much
but
as
that's how the comics are. If you look at the comics, when Peter just can't summon up the will or the energy or anything to finish the job, it's usually the city of New York and the people that give him some strength and give him a mulligan and help him out. I thought that's
what the earlier films did better, because it's the fact that he is a New York, and also it's the fact that, and you can vouch for this, New York's for being a fucking huge city, it's a tight-knit community. Like, it's like, people watch, at least that's the vibe I get. Pietro's being really quiet here.
I don't see that at all. I see it more like New York is very much leave me the fuck alone, and they don't really...
But the fact that they get behind Spider-Man, though, it's like it felt more earned in those movies. Here, it's just kind of like, we got to put that scene in there.
Oh no, I groaned. Even as a young guy seeing the first Spider-Man movie when they're throwing garbage at the Green Goblin, I was just like, what the fuck is this? This is just unnecessary. That looked like a throwaway scene if I'd ever seen one. It's I didn't understand the point of that at all. So and if they're gonna do that and they're gonna have this guy these people throwing trash and doing that, if you screw with one of us, you screw with all of us. At least he should have blown up the fucking bridge. I mean, that's what he's been telling people the whole time,
Shawn.
I was just gonna say, Pietro, like you said, you didn't see the point of it. I've always personally felt, maybe somebody's referenced this before officially or off the record, I don't know, but I've always felt that scene in the first Raimi film was less of a nod to anything in the comics as far as New Yorkers being behind him, as much as it was in there because of 9/11. Yeah. And that's exactly what it always felt like to me, including the bit at the very end of the movie where he lands in front of the American flagpole, which, as forced as it kind of felt, I still think is one of the best endings to a superhero film. But off the point, that's the point I always got out of it. And
that always felt more like Raimi's right-wing values more than anything else. At least the flag. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, my family's right-wing, and I got a little bit of right-wing in me. Not much, but, that's what I felt was...
Let's talk about what else you got in you, Jamie. Come on.
Zing. Go ahead.
Oh, God. No, that's it. We've lowered the tone. There's no coming back.
I think for some movies it works. But sure. I'm not a Superman fan, but seeing him carrying the American flag in the Superman movie that was very heartfelt. Seeing Spider-Man, a CGI version of Spider-Man, in front of an American flag in Raimi's movie, just felt like, okay, this is obligatory. We got to throw this in there. It didn't really feel like it had meaning behind it. Like you were saying before, Sean, that was very much a patriotic 9/11 thing. Again, another decision I didn't like. I didn't like them digitally removing the Twin Towers
from
the first Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
I think that if you really want to honor 9/11, you would have kept it in there and let that be the last scene that shows New York as a city before that devastation.
I agree completely.
Because then if you're going to remove the Twin Towers, you need to reference it. You need to say, why aren't these here?
Not only that, but like they clearly cut that scene from the movie, which was supposed to be Spider-Man's intro.
Oh yeah,
they cut it. It's like, well, it's the teaser, and then Sony yanked it, and it's like, well, I mean, I get the knee-jerk reaction because it just happened, but once it started to die down, well, not die down. That's a horrible phrase to use, but you know what I'm getting at. Like once the sensitivity got a little bit more, okay, we can start referencing again a little bit here.
But guys, come on here. You're not just talking about a scene with the Twin Towers in it or a shot. You're talking about the context of the scene. You're talking about a vehicle that is like a flying vehicle that is heading towards the towers. I'm not saying it's crashing into it, but even the slightest idea of that, you're not expecting a studio that has this much riding on the start of a series to take any chances like that. I think you're being unreasonable if you thought for a second they could keep it in.
This may not be something that most people recognize because, again, it is a very New York state of mind. But when you come to the city here and you go to these major construction sites where they're putting buildings up, tearing buildings down, there's a scene in Amazing Spider-Man where the construction workers start talking to each other, and there is an American flag hanging in the background, and it's one of the big set pieces, and it's just hanging there. It's not spotlighted or anything. It's just there. That is what happens here because these laborers, these workers, they don't forget, and they remember their patriotism, and they remember the people that they lost, and that they have to work together. So that was very touching for me because that's something that I see walking down the street. You see these guys getting together. New York has, even though there's New Yorkers have this very much distant mentality where people keep to themselves, there is that connection where New Yorkers are New Yorkers and they take care of their own. What I feel like that scene was just segued into the first Spider-Man movie, and it was thrown in there, like Sean and Jamie were saying, just a patriotic scene. In this movie, they actually did something. They acted on that mentality. They didn't just say something about it. So that's why it worked for me.
Now, Spider-Man, you'll face your greatest adversary, Captain Nitpicker. Nitpicker powers activate.
Okay, there's something else here that I want to talk about, and I think you guys are going to roll your eyes even as I say these two little words, but go with me on this. Mechanical web shooters. Okay? Now, I want to say that I was fully in defense of mechanical web shooters for a very specific reason, okay? I really think you can use that as a dramatic tool. What I did always enjoy in the comics and in the cartoons is that, you'd have this little gadget on his wrist and, he'd have this little indicator so he'd know how much web fluid he had. And as we know about Spider-Man, if he runs out of web fluid, he's fucked. And I thought that we're going to do that in the movie. He's got this little counter on it, and I thought we get cutaways to that. So he's in the sewers looking for the lizard, and the only way he's going to get out again is if he, shoots a web line up to get to the surface. Otherwise, he's fucked because he's on the creature's home turf. And they don't do anything with it. He has mechanical web shooters, but so what? Like, he never runs out of web. You never feel like he's in danger. Yes, he gets beat up a bit, but I thought that was such a letdown that he never actually runs out of webbing.
But again, that's not something that happens in every single Spider-Man story. It does happen, and it's the ironic thing of, oh, there you go, he ran out of webbing when he needed it. But if it happens in every single movie or every single story, then it becomes commonplace and it loses its importance. Now, if they never do that, if they never show that in the planned trilogy, then yeah, I'll agree it's a waste. But at the same time, it's one story that they just presented in this movie.
Whoa, that was sick, dude. You rock so hard, Spidey.
Oh, I give up. Don't hit me again.
Okay. Well, I hate to do this, but look, my big problem is, look, I'm not big for plot holes and stuff. Like, when I'm watching a movie, if I'm entertained by it, I just don't notice things. It takes smart people to actually tell me later on what the plot holes were. Avengers was like that. I didn't have any problems as I was watching it, and then, you know, when Jamie reviewed it, he pointed out some things which, you know, were big plot holes, and he was absolutely right to do so. But even me, I'm watching sequences in this movie, and I'm sorry, I'm just having big problems with the logic of it. And I'll give you the principal offender, okay? And I emailed Kristina about this, and she agreed with me. By the way, folks, unfortunately, we've lost Kristina at this point. Her Skype's cut out, and she has told us to go on without her. The bridge set piece. It's the first time that the Lizard shows up to cause some damage. It's the first time we see Spider-Man do one of his heroic deeds, rescuing people. Okay, so the Lizard has mutated, he's broken out, there's a big traffic pile up on the bridge, and he is trying to get to this one guy, who, for the purposes of this discussion, we will just call Shady Indian Guy. So he's trying to get through to Shady Indian Guy, but of course he's a wild animal, so he's flipping any old car left and right. Cars are flipping over the side of the bridge, and they're falling, about to plummet into the Hudson. Spider-Man shows up and fires some webbing, and the cars get attached to a stringle strand of webbing, and they're all dangling. Lizard vanishes. Spidey goes to rescue the one child and rescues the child, brings him back to his dad. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Spider-Man then goes off. You know, same as the Lizard. We have an external shot, and if I am not mistaken, we have at least 7 to 8 dangling cars with what I would assume they're still helpless, innocent bystander drivers stuck inside. He just left them. He left them to die. I'm sure they'll get rescued, but Mr. Responsible Spider-Man just left those guys in their cars. Am I wrong?
I thought about that, actually, when that shot came up.
That's an assumption on one perspective. You can look at it one way, you can look at it another. There were dozens of people running off the bridge.
Right.
You know, the kid who got stuck in the car, it looks like the dad got out of the car and went to get his kid out, but when he went to get his kid out, the car was thrown over. So, I mean, you can look at it however way you want. I think if you enjoyed the movie, you didn't have a problem with the scene. But if you want to pick it apart, you're going to find things like this just to pick apart the movie and say, what about these people?
I give up. Don't hit me again.
Okay. I'm just asking, because that was just how I saw it. I'm not wanting to pick it apart. I don't know why this has come over me like this. I just saw these sequences that didn't make sense to me. I mean, here's another example. It's the scene where the cop shoots at Spider-Man. You know, he's attacked the mugger and he's attached him to the wall with the webbing. That was a nice scene. And then the cop shoots at Spidey, despite the fact that the criminal is tied to the wall behind. And I think you'll notice the bullets only narrowly miss the criminal. He's probably lucky not to get shot in the head. There's one. You have that scene on the subway train where...
What was wrong with the scene of the cop shooting at Spider-Man, though?
Because he's blindly shooting at Spider-Man.
He wasn't blindly shooting at him. He was trying to, in his perspective, Spider-Man kept coming at him and he was defending himself.
And he almost shoots that criminal at the back of the wall.
So he can't try to defend. He was going for headshots. The fact that Spider-Man got out of the way means Spider-Man got out of the way.
I give up. Don't hit me again.
Why is Shady Indian Guy never seen again?
Shit got cut,
He's
that's
unimportant.
why.
He's not right, okay. He's not important.
I mean, if they would have put that scene in the movie where he confronts Connors down in the sewer with a gun, I would have groaned. Because this is a businessman. He might be a shady businessman, but he's a businessman. In an expensive suit, he's Norman Osborn's attaché. Okay, why the hell he's going around the sewers looking for Connors? I wouldn't have understood that at all. If anything, he would have hired mercenaries to go look for Connors.
I feel like he was probably looking for something of Connors in the lair, I guess, shrug, but it's not in the movie, so I'm like, whatever. I didn't have an issue with that personally.
I just see the cuts, that's all. Maybe if we didn't know about the backstage problems, as it were. Maybe I feel differently, but
Maybe.
I can see that this is not the film they shot originally. I see the cuts. I can see where lines are being overdubbed to try and join this patchwork together. You can tell not just that things are cut, but you can tell when sequences are being switched around from where they originally were in the film. It doesn't flow. For example, I'll give you a confession, guys. The school fight, I actually saw it on YouTube first. I'm a criminal. I'm sorry. It was because of the Stan Lee cameo. I saw a video saying Stan Lee cameo. Everybody's saying it's his best cameo ever. Well, I'll watch it. What the hell? I'm not too worried about spoilers. And I watched the scene of the fight. I enjoyed it a lot. In the context of the film, even though I enjoyed it, I was distracted by the fact that the sequence comes out of nowhere. There is no lead into it, except for a scene of the Lizard finding that the camera is property of Peter Parker, literally cut to the school, and he comes up through the floor. By the way, that was cut, and I can tell you why, because I saw the preview, the Comic-Con preview last year, so I know there was a scene in the bathroom where the Lizard, I don't know if he kills two girls, but there's two girls chatting in the bathroom, and he comes up, and there's the Alien 3 shot where, you know, he pins them against the wall and roars at them, and I don't know what happened to that.
Didn't the Lizard look different in that scene too?
Yeah, he had more of a snout, but it wasn't very noticeable. It wasn't like he had an alligator mouth.
No.
But
Okay. All right.
but then again, it looks like they swapped that scene out for the scene with him and Gwen, because if they would have done that twice in one movie,
Yeah.
it would have been predictable.
Yeah, he got you there, Phil. It's true.
No, he's got me on every single point. I'm sorry. I wish. Look, this is making me come off and this is cool actually, because this is fine. This is a new approach, but it's making me. No, I feel like I'm coming off as a nitpicking arsehole, and for that I apologise to everybody.
Well,
Everybody has the right to nitpick something that they have high expectations for. My thing is, I have zero expectations for these movies. I don't. I go in there saying, you need to impress me, especially if it's a reboot, especially if it's a remake. Impress me. Just show me something different. Show me a well-executed story. My main issue with Amazing Spider-Man was the marketing. That was my problem. But similarly to Liam Neeson's movie The Gray, they couldn't market this movie another way. If you didn't market it as the untold story, how do you market it as a reboot? You can't. People will go in expecting it's a continuation of the story with new actors. You couldn't market it a different way.
Which they kind of did at the end. They were like, they kind of switched up a little bit towards the end, actually.
Because they already
changed. They changed it from being it was the untold story for the longest time, and then it was I think it was Prepared to be Amazed.
Yeah, I mean that's probably when they decided to cut 15, 20 minutes from the film. That's when they were like, well, got to shift the focus of the marketing, which is fine. PR people, these people, they need to do these hip pocket changes, whatever better serves the movie. Just because they had a marketing strategy based on the untold story doesn't mean they have to see it through. There's no rule saying you have to see it through till the end, because that's how we started. The reason I mentioned The Gray is because so many people went into watching The Gray, myself included, saying, I want to see Liam Neeson beat the crap out of some wolves. You didn't expect to go into that movie and it being a survivalist character study. But there was no way to market that movie except as Liam Neeson beating up wolves.
There's nothing wrong with changing up your marketing strategy. It just shows that you're uncertain, and it shows a weak strategy to begin with, which, let's be honest, the marketing for this movie was fucking terrible. It succeeded, I don't know, I mean, you can't really not call it succeeding, because, I mean, it did really good business this weekend, but it didn't do amazing business like they want to keep saying. I mean, Sean and I have talked about this. Sony's been fudging so many fucking numbers since this movie opened Tuesday. It's not even funny how they're manipulating the numbers to make it look better than it is. And if you notice, they're not really bragging about the numbers right now. They're just like, yeah, we're happy with the gross. Like, they're not acting like a studio usually acts when a movie opens really well. I mean, because what were they saying, Sean? Remember, they were actually saying that this made the same amount Spider-Man 3 did, and that's an outright lie.
Yeah, they pretty much retconned their own midnight numbers for Spider-Man.
Yeah.
See, my thing is, I'm trying to figure out. Now, I'm a stickler for this. I don't follow box office numbers thoroughly, but I do stay up on what the studios actually say. And I have yet to see any studio news that says we broke this record, we did this. Nothing. There hasn't been a press release. There might be stuff in the trades. There might be stuff on different sites that do track the numbers. But nowhere did Sony outright come out and say, we made the same numbers that this movie made or that this movie made. There will be a press release coming this week, but I haven't seen Sony say anything. So Who says they're fudging numbers? The movie made $140 million in 6 days. 340 million worldwide, and it broke the opening day record for a Tuesday. The numbers do speak for themselves.
They're okay. They're not Spider-Man great though. You got to compare them to other movies. That's not where near the kind of numbers.
You don't. Why do you have to compare them to the other movies though?
Because it's a Spider-Man movie.
Well, Pietro, here's the thing. I mean, Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, but the only context that we were looking at it as when we were predicting how it was going to do was the fact that it was, whether it was a reboot, a sequel, a next installment in a franchise, whatever you want to call it, it is the follow-up to a movie that put the screws in a lot of people, and it's always interesting to see what the drop-off's going to be, if any, following on from that, no matter how many years it's been. It's happened to previous franchises. It didn't happen here. I honestly just, slight minimal drop, but really these are superb numbers. I mean, it's shocking to me.
They really are.
It's
considering the only movie you can compare it to box office wise would be Batman Begins, and that movie didn't do well opening.
No, people forget that. Yeah, people really forget how Begins really opened. It was supposed to do $100 million in 5 days. It did 74.
And pretty much here's my thinking. From what I've seen this past week, Sony very clearly was nervous about what was going to happen. Because when they came out and said that Spider-Man 3 did $7.5 million at midnight, after 5 years of anybody and everybody in the box office stratosphere believing that it did $10 million, and that's what they recorded as the estimate 5 years ago. That right there said that they were at least concerned about what was going to happen. And they needed to get this movie on some kind of pedestal to where they could pimp it out. Fortunately for them, it turned out... Yeah. Well, I think they're fine. I mean, it's still gonna. It might not hit 300 million, but it's still gonna make some bank.
Our predictions are wrong. I want to go, and Phil will not cut this part out because it should be said I was dead wrong on this movie's box office prediction. So I'll be the first to admit that. I'm raising my hand right here for the teacher because I said around 200 even, 225 best case scenario, maybe 230 because of the 3D bump. It's gonna do around 250, which. You know, it's good. You can't take that away from it, but it's still a huge drop from the other Spider-Man movies. So it actually puts it closer, interestingly enough, to Shrek Forever After and Pirates 4, which is like, I guess the question becomes like, actually, if we can segue, this kind of brings up a point about the next one, does the box office numbers benefit from here on out, or do they go smaller, or do they level out? I don't mean like for this one, I mean like for the next one.
I think it's hard to call right now just because we still need to see its life after opening weekend, how people are really going to remember it. Because
absolutely,
it's easy to see a movie one time and then 7 days later you're still in love with it. But 6 months from now it comes out on Blu-ray DVD. 2 years from now it's been on cable or whatever, and people have seen it more. That's what's really going to tell us, because that's what happened with Batman Begins. It was it opened poorly, relatively speaking, but it grew from word of mouth. The fans loved it, eventually got into the mainstream, and the movie played for the entire summer. And then when it hit DVD and cable, it just exploded from there.
Yeah, and you know what doesn't get reported enough? Warner Brothers was at one point not going to do a Batman Begins sequel.
True.
They were not going to do one, and even though it did great theatrically, they were like, yeah, fine, we'll pay you to write us a script for a sequel. They saw the home video numbers, and they was like, God damn, we're doing another one.
Okay, well, of course, the most important thing about the movie is something that none of us know. I mean, we might have, if we were doing this podcast 10 years ago, might have been having the exact same conversation about Sam Raimi's movie. Of course, it's now history, it's 10 years later, see how people talk about that movie, see how it divides people. Let's just see how history judges The Amazing Spider-Man. Let's see how we're talking about it in 10 years' time when it gets rebooted again. Nobody knows the answer to that. Something to mull on. But let's look to the future. It's a hit. We're getting another one. I sincerely hope, despite what they're claiming, that they're not rushing that damn thing out for, less than 2 years now. It's supposed to be out in May 2014 from Jamie's favourite writers. But the idea was basically...
Yeah!
I mean, let's just start off the top of your heads. What's the one thing, the absolute one dream thing that you would like to see in part 2, Pietro?
I very much. There are a lot of things that I like and dislike about the history of Spider-Man's comics. As far as the Ultimate comic line, I very much liked how it starts. Almost every volume starts with him going after. It just has a cold opening of him going after one of his lesser-known villains, Shocker or whoever. And I would very much like to see this movie, the next one, every Spider-Man movie part of this franchise start with the same kind of cold opening. I just want him already in action, doing his thing, and go into the story. We don't need to retread where we were before. I did like how in Raimi's movies the openings always remember the other ones. We don't need that. We get it. It's a sequel. If you've seen the second one, you damn well should have seen the first one. Just went to the damn story already.
Sean?
Not Venom. I can pretty much just give you a list of things I don't want to see.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah. No, I would honestly like to see Green Goblin. I mean, a lot of people are going to disagree with that, but I think it's going to be very hard to get through a trilogy without having Norman as the centerpiece at some point. Other than that, I'm open to anything they want to do, but except Venom. Just keep Venom away from this series.
I'm sorry, guys. You're going to so be let down by that. You know they're going to do Venom. Oh, my God. I know, what's his name? Josh Trank is attached to it, but that dude is attached to so many movies. I doubt Venom's going to be like the one that actually gets made, personally.
Well, what do you want, Jamie?
Me, I want $1 million. The Spider-Man. I don't really know, man. I mean, like, we're all gonna totally go see the Spectacular Spider-Man, like, in 2 years. I think it'll be pushed back a little bit. I don't think it's gonna be May. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if it's 3 years instead of 2, which is fine, because they would still retain the rights. I don't think it's gonna be as rushed as we think it's gonna be. But, and I don't know that. I'm just guessing. But, again, I would love for them to do the Gwen thing, but I just don't know if they'll do it. I know it's a lot to say you're gonna do it, but then they'll sit there and go like, oh wait, we actually have to do it now. I don't know.
I mean, if you want to pay, the proper kind of honor to the comics, then you would have to introduce Mary Jane in the second film, because MJ was friends with Peter and Gwen, and you would have to introduce them because MJ is who Peter turned to. She turned to him when Gwen died, not from a Spider-Man point of view, from Peter Parker and MJ losing a close friend. They were each other's support. It's not like he hopped from one woman to the other. So if they want to really do it right, introduce MJ in the second film. You don't have to have a love triangle. You just have her as a friend, and then that will build up and lead up. They should definitely bring Flash Thompson back. They need to bring more of Peter's, human characters. I don't give a shit about seeing Harry Osborn.
Or Jonah.
I mean, they can if they want to, but if they're going to do Jonah, they need to do it very much grounded, again, referencing the Ultimate Comics, how Peter Parker wasn't so much a photographer, but he was a web developer and a web designer for the Daily Bugle. He handled their blog and everything. That at least makes more sense, because him as a freelance photographer in high school, it doesn't work nowadays. He's not going to be able to pay the bills like that.
And actually, just getting back to something you were saying there, Pietro, one of my favourite absolute scenes, panels, whatever you want to call it, in all the Spider-Man comics is the moment between Peter and MJ after Gwen has died, where MJ tries to offer some consoling words and he just rips into her because, she is a party girl. She's given this impression that she's never cared about anybody else but herself. He says all the things that should just make her storm her out of that apartment, and she walks towards the door and she opens it, but then she closes it. And that's how that particular issue ends. It's one of my absolute favourites. If they did that, look, I'm not a purist by any means, but if they did that, shot for shot, I would be very happy. I'm going to agree with Sean that I really don't want that element stretched out to a trilogy. If you've set up Goblin, do it for the second one. Certainly as far as the look of that character is concerned, I can promise you, you are in a great position. You can't fall off the first floor. People are going to accept your design, whatever it is, as superior to what was done in Raimi's movie. They just will. I can see that immediately. So just do it, okay? But not to mention the fact that this movie tells us that Norman Osborn is dying. I don't know if he's cured yet, but I would assume that he can't wait around for a whole film 2 before he gets better. So best strike now. If you do it, film 2, I'm in. But there's plenty of time to speculate about it. I think that can just about wrap it up. Considering myself very, very severely owned this week, I've got bruises all over, I've got to tell you, Pietro, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
It was fun. Thanks.
Sean, thank you very much for joining us.
As always.
Next week, folks, honest to God.
Ice Age 4.
No, sorry.